afternoon, Patriots. This is the American Vision, broadcast on the TLBTV network and brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Bill Muckler, and I'm coming to you from my home studio in Cocoa, Florida. And today I'm really excited to have a special guest. He's a fellow Mizzou alum and a fellow Marine Corps officer and a fellow author. So we've got a lot in common, and so glad to meet up with him on the American Vision. So welcome, Richard Echols. And Richard, where are you coming from today?
Fort Worth, Texas.
You're in Fort Worth, Texas. And tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you went to, where you grew up, and where you went to college, and kind of how you got into the Marine Corps.
Well, I kind of grew up all over the place. My father was a Pentecostal minister and moved around a lot. I was born in Fresno, California. I lived for a while in Arkansas and then in Michigan, where I went mostly school classes there. And then moved to Missouri, where my dad had church there. Jefferson City, Missouri, and went to college there, Lincoln University, and with an art degree. And as you mentioned, I've changed my major 2 or 3 times, and so it took me 4.5 years, almost 5, to graduate.
Hey, we really got a lot in common, because that's my story too.
And about that time, the Vietnam War was heating up a lot. Now, Lincoln was a land-grant college, so you had to take 2 years of ROTC, which happened to be Army ROTC. And after the second year, you could option to get into the advanced course and get a commission as an Army officer. So they also offered to send us down to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, to see how the real troops do it. Mm-hmm. So we went down there and went out with the troops in the woods, and they got lost in the woods. And I'm thinking, these guys, this is their home country. They should know their own way around the woods. So I'm thinking, I don't know. I think I'll probably end up in Vietnam. Everybody's going to Vietnam. And do I want to go with somebody that gets lost in their own backwoods? And in fact, it's funny about Fort Leonard Wood. They call it Fort Lost in the Woods. They actually do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I went back to Lincoln University to finish up my degree there. And there was a Marine officer selection officer there, dress blues and all. And I'm going, I kind of like the uniform. They have a reputation of taking care of their own, training you right. So, and I kept getting a draft notice, 1A, and they had sent me to St. Louis for my physical and everything. And I told them, I'm not trying to duck it, just let me finish school. So about the 4th notice, and I said, I got to make a decision here. So I talked to the Marine officer selection officer and took the test. He swore me in, and then off to Quantico.
Yeah. Well, I almost had a similar situation. I was also on the 4.5-year plan, and the summer before I was supposed to graduate that following January, I got a notice to take that, what they call the pre-induction physical, and that was in St. Louis, and they had like a couple hundred of us there. And probably same thing happened to you, and we're down to our skivvies, and they're giving us this assembly line physical examination, and they said, you know, you're ready to go. And so I was able to do like you did. I got a deferment until I was able to graduate, and then I was number 1 on the list. So the Marine Corps, I always felt like I was a Marine, so the Marine Corps really appealed to me. So so then you go to Quantico, and you went to Quantico late in the year, so you went through what I always say is Marine Corps officers boot camp in the wintertime in Virginia. It's pretty darn cold.
Well, it started out pretty hot, but it got cold quickly. Cold enough it freeze your water in your canteens when you're out sleeping, even in a sleeping bag.
Then you got commissioned, and you swore an oath to defend the and support the Constitution of the United States. We took that oath. And where did you go from Quantico then?
From Quantico, I went to Camp Pendleton, California for tank training. And that was an interesting thing too. They gave us options on your preference for an MOS, military occupational specialty. And I was so gung-ho, my first choice was recon. My second choice was infantry. My third choice was tanks. They gave me tanks.
Yeah, tanks. You know, I think that's the only thing in the Marine Corps I never was in. I never was inside of a tank.
Well, it's it gets a little warm in there in Vietnam. We had the infantry convinced that we had air conditioners in there because we had bore evacuators. When we'd fire the cannon to suck the fumes out, we'd turn the bore evacuator on, and it sounds like an air conditioner. And the infantry also thought we had refrigerators in there because they would bring a warm beer. You got beer supplies in Vietnam, and we carried the beer supplies for the infantry and gave it to them when we could, but they would hand up a warm beer and we'd take it inside the tank and shoot it with a CO2 fire extinguisher, which immediately cooled it off. And we'd hand it back to them. Told them we got this right out of the refrigerator. Games we play, huh?
Yeah. So you ended up being a commanding officer of a tank company in Vietnam.
I did, yes. I had 17 tanks, 150 men, trucks, and all that stuff. The whole kit and caboodle. When I first got there, my first sergeant, he was a crusty old guy. He had been in Korea and 2 tours in Vietnam already. And he says, "Lieutenant, we need to have a meeting." I go, "Okay." He said, why don't we go with my experience and your education? And I said, "Top, I'm here to learn from you. I'm a boot lieutenant." So we got along great, and he got me started on Scotch. I didn't ask where he got that Scotch every month. It was forbidden, but you don't ask a first sergeant where he gets supplies.
Yeah.
So we'd sit down in the shade of a tank and solve the world problems and then get our mission done.
Yeah. I had a similar situation when I got to the 1st Marine Brigade. I was assigned to a Marine Air Control Squadron. And after 6 months, I was made a senior air director. And but I had a gunny sergeant that was I really had a lot of confidence in. It was really a fantastic guy. And I used to meet with him every morning. We'd talk over what we need to do and what we're going to do and what our problems were. And then the gunny took over, you know, and all I had to worry about was 3 lieutenants I had. And I'm just a new lieutenant myself. 3 lieutenants I had learned how to, control aircraft. So that was a similar situation. So we really got a lot in common here.
We do.
After Vietnam, you got back out after you spent a little more than 4 years on active duty, and then came home. And what did you do then?
Well, that's interesting because in Vietnam, I also, as you know, everything in the Marine Corps supports the infantry. So at times, some of my tank platoons were assigned to infantry battalions. And in those dull moments, well, it was never dull, but I did some investigations for Marine Corps against the investigations of Uniform Code of Military Justice. And because you couldn't really find investigators all that easily out in the boonies in Vietnam. So they would assign me to do these. And so that led to an interest in law enforcement and investigations. So when I got back and got out of the Marine Corps, I joined the Missouri Department of Public Safety and was there 23 years, last 9 years as deputy director, and did a lot of investigations there. So, and then I worked for the Missouri Auto Dealers Association because I'm a car guy. And that was after I retired from the state. And then later on, I moved to Illinois, Belleville, Illinois, close to St. Louis. You probably know where that is. And,
yeah.
And became an investigator for an attorney there, which led to my books, the investigations in those.
Yeah, so that led you to becoming an author, and what prompted you to write a book or put all this in a book?
Well, after 3 years of investigating the Colt Ace situation, and I had a lot of things written down, notes about the investigation, I thought I might as well write a book about it. and I talked to.
Go ahead and tell the story of what you did the last 3 years.
Okay. I first, to get into this, after moving to Illinois, and I had 2 sons that still lived in Jefferson City, Missouri. And so I went back to visit them and stayed with my younger son who doesn't drink coffee, which is kind of relevant because I get up early in the morning and I want coffee. So I go to McDonald's, get a senior coffee. And a friend of mine from high school is sitting there, and we used to run around together in high school. And so I joined him, and he says, "What are you doing now?" I said, I'm an investigator for an attorney in Illinois. And he said, "Well, that's interesting." He said, I want to talk to you about something. I said, "What's that?" And he said, "My brother allegedly committed suicide back in 1968. So this is about 5 years ago now. So it's a really cold case." And he says, "But the family never believed that." He says, "Can you look into that and tell me what's going on? What happened here?" So I said, "Okay, I'll do what I can." So I go to the newspaper archives and read the article about this alleged suicide, contact the highway patrol and get a report from the trooper that investigated that case. And I find out that talking to my classmate, reading the report, reading the interviews that the trooper did, that this kid at 19 years old, number one, was almost going to be drafted into Vietnam. And he was a little bit leery about that. But anyway, he was going with this girl, and they allegedly had a baby together. And he'd been out drinking with some friends of his, and he came home, and then this is on a Thursday night, I think it was. Comes home and he's kind of agitated, but he wants to go see this girl, his girlfriend. And he's been told not to, he's been warned not to go there. So a little bit crazy, a little bit drunk, he borrows my classmate's car, borrows a handgun from another brother, a Colt Ace, which is a 22 caliber, looks like a Colt 45, shoots like it, but it's a smaller handgun. I mean, smaller caliber.
Smaller caliber. And so he was going to do something stupid like a bunch of us did stupid stuff when we were 19, huh?
That's, yes. So he went over to the house. He's waking everybody up, causing all kinds of trouble. The girl comes out to see him and says, "You need to leave. You're upsetting the kids. You're upsetting my mother who's in the house," the whole bit. And she goes back in the house, and the mother then calls the highway patrol and says, "I think there's been an accident. Car has gone off in the ditch in front of the house, and you need to send a trooper out." So 5 or 10 minutes later, there's no trooper yet. So she calls the highway patrol troop headquarters again and says, "I think I heard a gunshot." Well, when I read that report, I thought, that's kind of funny. Did the guy run off into the ditch and then shoot himself with it in his brother's new Mustang? I don't think so. And what would you report first, an accident or the gunshot?
Obviously the gunshot, but so this really is strange, isn't it?
It is. And then, well, and then what led to further investigation of it and convinced me that it wasn't suicide, although the trooper determined within 5 minutes that it was attempted suicide. The kid wasn't dead yet, but he had a gunshot wound in his right temple. Now, the trooper, I don't know how he knew the kid had a gun, but obviously assumed that because he found the gun between the kid's left leg and the door on the driver's side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I don't know how the gun got in that position because he shot in the right temple.
So he's right-handed shooting right temple, but the gun's down here.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, he sent the gun to the highway patrol lab, gets fingerprints on it. Fingerprints is on it from his left hand. And the kid is left-handed. It's a little bit strange. Yeah.
Kind of hard to do, isn't it?
Absolutely. So investigating this, and there's a guy that shows up on the highway patrol report that I don't know where he came from. His name was Frank Powell. Actually, that was his name. And I tried to track him down to see if he had some kind of involvement in this. So this is where I get back to my first sergeant, who had retired from the Marine Corps, and now he's a homicide detective with the LAPD. And I think I had indications that this guy had gone to California. So I contacted Top, and by now he's retired from the LAPD, but he's still got connections. So he tracks this guy down, finds him. He's a security guard at a mall there. So anyway, we interview him, we go through this, and so I relied a lot on Top's skills and experience back in Vietnam, and again went to him for his experience. So he gets involved in this investigation also. Mm-hmm. So the difficulty in this one is it's been so long, a lot of people are dead. Can't interview him. So I want to interview the trooper. He's still alive, I find out. So I call his home, talk to his wife, and say, can I talk to him? She says, I'm sorry, he had a stroke last week. He can't communicate. So just adds to the complications of completing an investigation in that.
So this is really a fascinating story, and we don't want to give too much of it away because we'd like to have our viewers go ahead and get the book and really read the whole story of it. So this is really fascinating. Now, you also wrote another book, from what I understand.
I did. Now, and the first one, the Cold Ace.
Okay, great.
That one, I designed the cover on that one, and I did on the second one too, which is Motor Dynasty.
Mm-hmm. And you said you're a car guy, so I presume this has something to do with automobiles.
It does. Actually, both of them do. I refer in both books to some events, basically car chases. One of them is with my Maserati. I like fast cars.
Okay.
And I ride motorcycles, and I like guns too. But that's a whole other story. But a lot of that feeds into what's in these books. And the second one is also not so much mostly true cold case story as it is a work of fiction inspired by true events. So it was a case that, again, was involved in Jefferson City with a car dealer that he and his wife were found dead in their house from asphyxiation, carbon monoxide poisoning, car running in the garage. But investigating this, I discovered that it was impossible that he left it running. So somebody else must have done it. So trying to find out who did that, again, after 50 years, that's difficult to do. But and it's funny, the Marine Corps connection, and going back to this neighborhood where the guy lived, there was a retired Marine colonel that lived next door that recalls some of the events that went on then, and he was a help in helping solve this mystery also.
That's fascinating. So, you know, our Marine Corps careers really kind of come in place, throughout our lives. And I think they kind of prepare us for lives. I know myself, I learned so much about leadership and responsibility, accountability, integrity, and just how to do things and how to take on jobs and tasks that just there's no way to describe how valuable all that is, and it appears that you had the same experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I can see behind you you have what looks like a diploma. Is that your commission in the Marine Corps?
That is, it is indeed.
And then the plaque with the Marine Corps emblem, and also for those of you are watching, that's the Marine Corps officer's sword, and it's crossed with the scabbard. And because I saw Richard had his, I got mine out so you can see. And I don't know how this is going to look, but we're really proud of our swords. That was something that when we got commissioned, and that was the first day they actually called us Marines. That was really a proud day, wasn't it?
It was indeed.
Yeah.
And the eagle, globe, and anchor, and you got your sword and engraved, beautiful engraving on it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
On it, and probably got it at the Marine shop in Quantico.
Yes.
And for your audience, the history of that sword is something else too, with the Mameluke hilt on it,
Mm-hmm.
that was presented to Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon in Tripoli, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli and all
Mm-hmm.
that. And of course, he went in with a handful of Marines and some mercenaries and defeated the pirates at Tripoli. And in honor of that, they presented him with the Mameluke sword, and so the officer's been carrying that ever since.
Yes, and very proud of it, and know the story well, and fantastic history in the Marine Corps, and I guess that's something we're all really very proud of, and we hear the stories and know the stories and so forth, and I don't know exactly when this show is going to air, but it's probably going to be somewhere around Veterans Day, maybe a little bit after Veterans Day, and this will be the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, and of course in 1918, 100 years ago, was when the Marines fought in the Battle of Belleau in France, which was really a turning point in World War I.
Absolutely. Also celebrating a long time for the Marine Corps aviation. I think that was started over 100 years ago.
Yeah, it was. And of course, the Marine aviation, Marine Corps aviators go to school at Pensacola for flight training, and that's in the Naval Air Station. So they become actually naval aviators, even though they're Marine Corps pilots.
Right. Well, of course, we know the Navy guys are frequently reminding the Marines that they're in the Department of Navy. And you know what our response is that we admit we are, but it's the men's department.
There you go. Absolutely. And then I always try to make our Navy brothers feel good, because I always tell them that all of us Marines really love the Navy, because they took us on these cruises, to exotic places, and we got free food and drinks and medical care. What's not to love? I don't know about you, but when you went to Vietnam, did you go by ship?
No, we flew on a commercial airline, and that's an interesting story too. The head flight attendant was a Swiss lady, an attractive lady, but on our way to Vietnam, we weren't thinking a whole lot about women at that point. But 30 years later, after I went through a divorce, I met this lady again and married her.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't have any kind of a wonderful experience like that. In 1961, I was in a little bit earlier than you. I was in the 1st Marine Brigade based in Hawaii, and we sailed out of Pearl Harbor for Vietnam, and it took us 21 days because the slowest ship was an LSD, and they could only do 8 knots. And then when we got there, some of the units went ashore, and a lot of people don't know about this because they don't think because history tells us that we didn't really get Vietnam cranked up until after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, around 65 or so. But this was in the spring of 61. But for whatever reason, our ship, the USS 16 Cabildo, an LSD, they sent us to Okinawa. So we spent time in Okinawa, and I think you were in Okinawa yourself, weren't you, for a while?
I was, yeah. Came through Okinawa, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Camp Schwab and Camp Hansen.
Schwab and Hansen. I was at Fatima because we were an air control squadron,
Right.
so they put us at the Marine Corps Air Station. Actually, it was a Marine Corps Air facility then. Right. And it's been upgraded to a Marine Corps Air Station since then. And then from there, they sent us to Japan. Before we got to Japan, to land on Japan, they sent us back to Southern California. So I spent a lot of time aboard ship. I think I'd have preferred a commercial flight, especially with a flight attendant.
Yes.
But that's just an amazing story, a heartwarming story. So what are you doing now? Are you writing any, you have any more books to write, or?
I'm working on another novel. It's called Flight to Destiny. And it too is a work of fiction inspired by actual events. Mm-hmm. And involves some people that I knew that were actually spies, and did some operations in Nicaragua with Ollie North, another famous Marine.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually met Ollie at a book signing and had a chance to chat with him for about 5 minutes or so.
Oh, yeah. So these, the books, you mentioned difficult to find them. Both of them are supposed to be available on Amazon as well as Barnes and Noble. And you might have to go to, author is listed as R.N. Echols, and they're both called Connor Pennington novels. So the main character in there is, I've given the name Connor Pennington. Between you and I and your audience too, that's basically me.
Okay, and that's probably why I was looking for Richard, but it's your initials, R.N. Echols. And this video is going to be embedded into an article, so we'll make sure we get all that information in there and links to it so we can go ahead and get your books. Now, what you showed me looked like the large size soft covers, which I really like. I think that's really a great way to get the books published. But do you also have them on as ebooks?
Yes, they're available as ebooks. Motor Dynasty is available through Outskirts Press in Colorado. And if anyone goes to outskirtspress.com/Motor Dynasty, they'll get right to the book. And
okay.
Know about it, and it's available in ebook and directly from the publisher at a discount even.
Well, I'm really looking forward to getting them because I have to confess to my viewers that I always try to read a book, by an author. But Richard and I have been talking back and forth, and we kind of decided to do this real quick before I had a chance to read his books. But I'm definitely going to get them and read them. I try to read a book a week, and I wish more people would do that.
I do also. I read a lot, and it's enjoyable. I read all kinds of books. A lot of them are mystery books and crime related. I kind of lean towards that. So I probably read a book a week.
Yeah. I started, I guess I read a lot, and some of my college classmates said they never knew I read a book, so how could I write one? But I actually did. I guess I was a closet reader. But I really learned how to read books when in sailing back and forth across the Pacific, and you know, there's not really a whole lot you can do when you're aboard ship. You know, you can you know, get physical train PT going and stuff like that. But I remember one of the books I read found on the ship that I guess one of the naval officers had was James Mitchell's Hawaii, which was about 1,000 pages. And I think I read that in like 3 or 4 days or something like that. Just to show you, you know, how much, you know, you how much time you have on your hands. But so it sounds to me like you've got a great life, and you've had a lot of great experiences. And is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
Well, a lot of those experiences are included in both books. And so it's, now I'm not going to relay which is true and which isn't. That's up to the reader.
let us discover that for ourselves. That's the whole idea of reading a book.
Right. So yeah, I enjoy it, and I enjoy writing. I'm still doing some research on my third book, and that involves, as I mentioned, some spy issues, but it gets back into some true history. When I was in public safety, I went to a Senate oversight hearing in Washington, D.C., and stayed at Howard Johnson's Motor Lodge, which just happened to be right across the street from Watergate. And that happened to be the night of the break-in at Watergate.
Whoa, that's fascinating.
So that's in my third book.
Ah, great. Okay, now you really got my interest piqued on this one. Okay, Richard, it's been such a pleasure catching up with you and meeting up with you, and I really appreciate you being on the American Vision, and thanks for being such a great guest. And you really got a great story to tell, and you had a great life, a great resume, great bio. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Okay, boys and girls, I'm back, and I hope you enjoyed our talk and our chat with Richard Echols. And I think you can see that both of us have an awful lot in common, although I think he's probably led a lot more interesting life than I have, and had a lot more interesting experiences, even though we both went to Mizzou and we're both captains in the Marine Corps, and authors and everything else. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to reading his books, and I hope you will too. And so remember, his books are on Amazon.com under R.N. Echols, E-C-H-O-L-S, and pick one up and start reading. And speaking of reading, how about getting my book too? And if you already got it, which you probably have, tell other people about it. Tell people to start reading books, and read Richard's books, and read my books, and read other authors' books. I think, you know, there's so much great experience and stories, really heartwarming, and much better than just spending time reading stupid stuff on email and social media, which, you know, I do too. You know, we all do. But okay, and I want to leave you with something I usually forget to tell you, and that's where there is no vision, the people perish. And that's 29:18, Proverbs 29:18. That's something I kind of use as a guideline for my life and my book, and try to have a vision and try to make sure that our people are great citizens in this great country, do not perish from enemies without and within. And so I'll end this up by wishing everybody a safe rest of 2018. And God bless you all. God bless our active duty personnel and our vets. And God save our America, because we need you now more than ever before.